Hi, I'm Peter Nixon, host of Dialogue Matters, a blog for leaders wanting to manage change, resolve conflicts, and realize opportunities. In this series of vlogs, I introduce key aspects of the potential dialogue system, and I relate them to the current problems that are facing people here in Hong Kong, where I'm recording today. Other videos in the series introduce you to Dialogue Gap, the dialogue puzzle, which you see on the wall behind me, and managing negative emotions. Today I'll explain the difference between communication and dialogue, which is represented with these two pictures of doors, also on the wall behind me. And I'll introduce you to the skills that effectively differentiate good communicators from good dialogue leaders, not exactly the same. And I'll recommend a few of these dialogue skills for use by the Hong Kong government and by the democracy protesters so that they can begin to reconcile their differences. First of all, let's consider the difference between great communicators and great dialogue leaders. When we think of great communicators, we tend to think of great speakers, writers, artists, and musicians, and even actors, right? People who are very good at expressing themselves. And when we think of great communicators, we also think of great listeners who may be close friends. They may be coaches, counselors, psychiatrists, therapists, people who, when you're with them, you really feel connected. The communication industry itself is largely focused on designing and sending out messages to target audiences. And because of the internet, humans are communicating more than at any time in history. But if we're communicating more than at any time in history, why is it that we have so many dialogue gaps, causing so many problems at work, at home, and in society, in the environment? This question is what led me to discover that dialogue and communication are not exactly the same. If communication is mostly about sending information, dialogue can be best described as thinking together. Communication requires a lot of speaking and a lot of listening, or as I call it, expression and absorbing. And I refer to these two sets of skills in my book, Dialogue Gap. Effective dialogue, however, goes further than communication, and it does include expression and absorbing messages, but it also includes presence, respect, and suspending. So let me explain what I mean by these. First of all, let me consider presence. When you're resolving conflict or realizing opportunities or managing change, to be highly effective, you should be physically and mentally present with the people you're interacting with, the key stakeholders. Physical presence happens less and less nowadays because our responsibilities tend to take us across geographies, and our schedules are filled to overflowing, so we rely on the internet now to multitask and connect with others more than ever before. Our diminishing mindfulness and our mental presence is now well documented as becoming a problem. Our ability to hear, to feel, and to comprehend what others are expressing is getting worse and worse the more time we spend in front of the camera and in front of our screen. And yet, when wanting to resolve conflicts, realize opportunities, or manage change, we need to know what others think and what others are feeling about the issues. Practice your mindfulness to become a better dialogue leader, and you'll begin to see real value. Yoga and meditation are fast becoming popular with everyone as we recognize our need to improve our presence to deal with life in the world today. Let me now consider respect. While examining why clients didn't speak or listen, even though that they knew the solution was in the dialogue and were trying to be present, I discovered when working with my clients that there was two more sets of skills that differentiated communication and dialogue. The first of these is respect. The only way leaders today can keep track of what's really going on and know the issues in a fast-moving situation like we're experiencing in Hong Kong's current protests or in any organization or industry today is to talk to the stakeholders. But if the stakeholders don't respect their leaders, or if they feel their leaders don't respect them, the stakeholders either won't express themselves, or if they do, they'll express themselves with words laden with anger and mistrust. Leaders must respect others and realize without their input they'll never achieve the optimal outcomes that they aspire to when resolving conflicts, managing change, and trying to realize opportunities. Most leaders who don't respect key stakeholders don't actually last in office very long, but those who do tend to do so by the use of force of some kind. Let's consider the last of the categories, suspending. The 5 sets of skills which define effective dialogue leaders is presence, respect, expression, suspending, and absorbing. But the set that is most difficult for the most highly qualified and experienced leaders is this one, suspending their assumptions, suspending their ego, suspending their beliefs in order to create a space for dialogue to happen. Once leaders get to the top of their organizations, their success depends a lot less on their own ability and a lot more on the people that they lead. What we found, however, is that highly qualified and experienced leaders struggle to want to take the time to listen to people who are less qualified and less experienced than they are. And this unwillingness to take the time is a form of disrespect. But we've already talked about respect. The point here is that leaders need to know the perspectives of the stakeholders and the people they are leading in order to know how to resolve the conflict or manage change or realize the opportunities. And leaders who don't know and assume that they know what the stakeholders are thinking seldom achieve the best possible outcomes, the optimal outcomes, which I've referred to and defined in earlier vlogs. The word that is key here is suspend, because highly qualified and experienced leaders might be right in their thinking about a situation, but that's not the point. By suspending their thoughts long enough to create a space for dialogue, stakeholders will teach leaders things that they didn't know and vice versa. The space is the key. Furthermore, this space is where the magic happens. This is where people gain insights, where innovations arise, and where learning happens. This is where you get those aha moments. And without suspending, even if the other 4 sets of dialogue skills are employed, seldom will the optimal outcomes be achieved. Effective dialogue leaders need all 5 sets of skills. They need presence, they need to be respectful, they need to be good at expressing themselves, they need to suspend their assumptions and create a space for dialogue, and they need to be very good at listening or absorbing the key messages which are being sent in their direction. In my book, Dialogue Gap, I identify and describe 10 specific behaviors for each of these 5 sets of skills. But let's now consider a few of these, just 3 that I've selected, in the context of the current conflict between the Hong Kong government and the democracy protesters. To have fun learning dialogue and negotiation skills, I've created a few card games. And with respect to the situation in Hong Kong, I've selected 3 specific behaviors, here they are, that will make a real difference when used by government and protest leaders. 2 of these skills come from the categories of respect and 1 from suspending. First, let me tell you about the 2 of diamonds. Here it is. The 2 of diamonds reminds us to be diplomatic and not to criticize or use judgmental labels. Doing this obviously makes you feel better. It satisfies your own needs, but it also skips the needs of the other party and causes them to feel worse. It adds oil to the fire, if you wish, and it creates more silence and violence, preventing you from eventually engaging in dialogue. Another of the cards, the 7 of diamonds, reminds us to involve all the key stakeholders in the dialogue. It was clear in the Occupy movement 5 years ago, and it's clear again today, that the government and the protesters spend way more time talking to each other in their own groups than they do talking across lines with people from the other side. And this problem is not going to solve itself. Hong Kong needs to create ways to engage the key stakeholders in dialogue on the future of Hong Kong. I will discuss in my next vlog dialogue methods that can be used and I'll suggest some specific things that perhaps Hong Kong should be doing as soon as possible to make this thing work out. And finally, out of the 50 cards that describe 10 different specific behaviors for each of the 5 sets of skills, I have picked the 5 of spades, which is a form of suspending, and it reminds leaders to avoid the either-or choices or seeing the world as black or white. Actually, Asia is better at doing this than America. In America, you hear people say, you're either with us or you're against us. But here in Asia, we're often reminded of the middle way. We tend, however, to lose sight of this middle way when we get upset. In the current problems racking Hong Kong, both the protesters and the government are expressing issues of importance. Arguing that the government is wrong and should resign, or the protesters are thugs and they should be arrested, doesn't allow for this middle ground to be found. All sides need to respect each other, and they need to suspend their judgments of each other long enough to create a space for dialogue to happen. So in conclusion, today we've considered the difference between communication and dialogue, and we've revealed 5 sets of skills that are needed for dialogue leaders. We've also highlighted the need for leaders in Hong Kong to respect other stakeholder groups and to suspend their assumptions about each other. In the next edition of Dialogue Matters, I'll discuss dialogue methods and explain how these can be used to help Hong Kong regain its Lion Rock spirit and continue to be one of the best cities in the world in which to live and work and play. I'm your host, Peter Nixon. This is Dialogue Matters, reminding you that the solution is in the dialogue.